Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dolce.
Hello, welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast, the high-minded conversation for the post-prohibition generation. I'm your host, Joe Dolce, and with me today is Matthew Hendershot. Hi, Matthew.
Hi, Joe. Thrilled to be here. Really excited for this episode. I think we have a lot of great stuff to share, and I think that this might be one of the most important and information-filled episodes that we've done so far.
This is an episode that's devoted to the health emergency surrounding vaporizing that's currently going on. And we're really lucky because we interviewed this intrepid journalist called Foster Winans, who really months ago trekked out to the Emerald Triangle way before this scandal broke. He was investigating what he thought might be a problem with these concentrated oils that are being produced illegally. And what he found, I think, is going to blow your mind, and it has not been widely reported in either the mainstream or even in the alternative press, except for one venue. So stay tuned. I think it's really worth listening to. Before we begin, I want to let you know that this episode is being brought to you by Firefly 2 Plus, which is a new vaporizer on the market. And I want to tell you that besides loving the Firefly, and regarding vaporization, if you want to be 100% sure that the cannabis you're inhaling is clean and pure, it's highly advisable that you vaporize flower. Clean, organic, and if possible, preferably tested flower. Because you're going to hear in this interview, what happens when you make a concentrate is that the oils get distilled down. And if there's any impurities in those oils, they're going to make it a much more dangerous product to inhale because, of course, they're concentrated. Secondly, if you are going to vaporize, I think it's really important, and the world knows it's really important, to choose a machine that's made with excellent materials. Not a lot of vaporizers talk about this, but this is why we at the podcast really love the Firefly 2 Plus. The machine and the technology in it have been really carefully selected to deliver an optimal, clean, and excellent experience for a couple of reasons. One is the vapor path. The Firefly 2 is the only vaporizer on the market that has an all-glass vapor path, from the bowl to the mouthpiece. Yes, even that slightly metallic-looking bowl is all glass. And more specifically, it's a medical-grade glass, which is highly safe and heat-resistant. It's the same glass that's used in cookware and in lab glass items. And that really makes a difference. As of now, the Firefly is the only product on the market using this. Firefly also heats on demand in only 3 seconds. That makes it quick and easy to take a hit here or there as you desire. You don't have to sit and have an entire session. That's unlike most conduction vaporizers that take a long time to heat up and then stay hot, which means, really one session you have to burn through the whole bowl.
Well,
so for us,
Not to mention that as that's heating up, all your lower vaporizing point, your flavonoids and your cannabinoids that are low vaporizing point are just going up in smoke.
Completely gone. They're just going. Yeah, exactly. So for us, that kind of a vaporizer, these conduction vapors are not as appealing as the convection vaporizer. Here's another reason we really like the Firefly 2 Plus. It's $50 less expensive than the first version of the Firefly. And if you go to thefirefly.com and use this promo code, BRAVE, B-R-A-V-E, you'll get an additional 20% off. That's www.thefirefly.com. So we highly recommend it. We all here have been using it for months now and can't say enough good things about it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, may seem like a big investment cost up front, but really with everything that's going on and just, the more that we learn, it's well worth the price to know that you're, adding a step to your high enjoyment process that is going to be safe and reliable and last you for years to come.
Not only that, there's one more thing I will say, as I said before, is that it is an extremely efficient device. None of what you're vaporizing goes up in smoke.
Yeah, it's great.
You're using much less to get the same effect.
Oh yeah, full flavor, full smell, no burning, just this great hit. It's wonderful.
I guess it's fair to say we really love it. So there you go. Before we begin, I also want to tell you that, yes, this show is sponsored by Firefly. We are now accepting sponsors that we really love and trust and believe in. And we are also supported by Patreon, by you guys. So if you have a few dollars or pennies to spare, we would really appreciate your support. It helps keep us keeping on. It keeps the lights on. It keeps the sound engineer going. It keeps the show being able to be brought to you in a regular, methodical way. So please, if you're capable, if you have the dollars, please consider sponsoring us on Patreon. Matthew, where can folks go to do that?
Well, they can obviously find the link to Patreon on our website. So you can go to bravenewweed.com, where you can find not only the links to Patreon, but all of our social media and archived episodes of the show. But to go to Patreon directly, you just visit patreon.com/bravenewweed. You'll see episodes of the show, posts, Patreon-specific posts, and bonus content for specifically patrons, and a variety of reward tiers as low as $1, which just says thanks for putting out the podcast, and upwards of $10 or more, where you can get copies of the book, special visits, invites to things, anything that we can come up with that we put on there. So patreon.com/bravenewweed to become a patron today.
Before we get to this great interview, there's a few very short news items that we want to talk about. Matthew, can you start with one, please?
Sure. This episode's going to get a little heavy, but I thought we could start off the news with something really fun, which is, as of October 1st, the very first official cannabis cafe has been opened in West Hollywood.
What's it called?
It's called the Lowell Cafe. And it's sort of a, bespoke little cafe that's been put together by the people of Lowell Farms, which is an organic cannabis farm located in Santa Barbara County. The cafe itself is in West Hollywood. You can go there. You are legally allowed to spark up a joint there and enjoy some cannabis. And the menu itself is curated and presented by a bud tender who can walk you through, different food dishes and treats and sweets and all sorts of things that are infused with cannabis or CBD or any sorts of things.
So you can eat as well as inhale.
Oh, it's absolutely a full-service, seasonal, available menu cafe for food and desserts that are in various ways infused.
So any listeners in LA, if you do go in, please tell us what you think of it. Drop us a line. I mean, we haven't been there personally, but I'm very curious to know.
Yeah.
What else is on the news docket this week?
Well, the other interesting piece of news comes out of Canada. We all know that Canada recently just nationally legalized the recreational use of cannabis, and there was some concerns about what the impacts of that might be. Last year before legalization went out, a lot of employers were asked if they thought the legalization of cannabis would impact negatively productivity or absenteeism at work. And a new survey has reported that actually that doesn't seem to be the case. About 74% of employers stated on the survey that the legalization process has had no impact on productivity at work. And another 70%, not another 70%, but 70% of those asked have also said that they have not seen an increase in absenteeism since legalization.
Good. Glad to know it. Not a surprise to me, but glad that the world is also recognizing it.
Sure. There's a couple of potentials. This is one of those things where you can't necessarily equate causation and correlation. A lot of these businesses don't allow employees to ingest before coming to work or while they are at work. So that could be a reason why there doesn't seem to be a change. Maybe Canadians are just refraining until after they get home from their shifts.
Who knows?
But
who knows?
Just one of those fear things that doesn't seem to be panning out. People are being responsible adults and using cannabis and still making it to work the next day.
What a surprise.
Listeners, I want to personally thank you all. The Brave New Weed podcast is now bigger and more popular and more widely consumed than ever before. And that's because of all of you. But we don't want to stall out now, and we want to continue to grow. So we have one simple ask. If you love the show, Share it with one other person who you may know, who may benefit, or has a curiosity and just wants to learn more. Your act of sharing with just one person can help us continue to grow, and by that growth, continue to bring you all of the best news, commentary, interviews, features, and more right here on the Brave New Weed podcast.
Foster Winans is a reporter who's been covering cannabis for the last few months on his own. And he came across an amazing story when he was in Northern California. Turns out that a few less than scrupulous growers in California are trying to make a buck in the illegal market. And what they're doing is they're planting cannabis, growing it quickly, and spraying it with a fungicide called myclobutanil. Now, this is an approved fungicide. It's used all over California, on all vegetables and fruits, because it is washed off after the vegetables are picked. But as you all know, cannabis can't be washed. So it's highly likely that this pesticide is being used on plants that are cultivated, cured, and then concentrated into oils that escape the state's pretty wonky regulatory system. Foster tracked this from the beginning to the end, and it's an amazing tale of discovery and a testament to why good old on-the-ground reporting still really matters. Listen to this interview. You're not going to hear it in many places, and it's really worth paying attention to.
Foster Winans.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks for joining us on the Brave New Weed podcast.
Glad to be asked.
Welcome back from California. So you've been doing some really interesting reporting on the vape crisis, the vape health emergencies, whatever you want to call them. And I want to bring some of what you're learning to light to our listeners, because I'm not reading about it in the mainstream press. So thanks a lot for joining. Tell me how you began this whole pursuit anyway, how you started writing and reporting on marijuana.
Well, last year I decided I wanted to report on what I thought is the biggest cultural pivot in American history since the Vietnam War, and that's the legalization of marijuana. It cuts across everything. It's criminal justice, it's pharmaceuticals, it's hemp, industrial uses, all sorts of things, So I happen to know some people who are marijuana farmers. They don't call them farmers; they call them cultivators. But in Mendocino County, which is in Northern California, it's in the Emerald Triangle. There are 3 counties there where most of the pot that's consumed in the country, or a large percentage of it, comes from. That includes Humboldt County, which was the subject of a TV series called Murder Mountain. But Mendocino is not Murder Mountain, and that's where the people that I knew are growing. So
now, to give our listeners a little context here, in California there is the legal market, and then there is the illegal market, and not everybody chooses to participate in the legal market, and those people are known as illegal growers, which is sort of a harsh term, don't you think?
Well, it is a harsh term. I like outlaw simply because it evokes cowboys riding around on horses. But the terminology of marijuana is interesting. How it's developing. I was talking to the branding chief at a major cannabis company, and he said, "Well, outlaw is now traditional. They're traditional growers." So
the outlaw grower is now known as the traditional grower. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah,
I like that.
That's right. It's much more sophisticated.
And they also traditional growers. I mean, the ones I know, the traditional growers are also very good farmers. They're doing great growing practices, right?
Well, that was the thing that attracted me in the first place. There are places in Northern California where it seems like it's still 1969. There are people running around in tie-dye and children without shoes on. And these are people who have been growing marijuana in those hills for decades, 30 years, 40 years, starting with patches out in the middle of the national forest. But now they're pretty well embedded in the local economy and the local culture. And in certain places, they watch each other. They watch each other's backs, but they also watch each other, and they know who's using the wrong things on their crops. They've learned how to organically grow marijuana without without using pesticides and fungicides and things like that are now at issue.
Yeah, when I was out there reporting my book years ago, the growers I was hanging around with out there were waking up very early in the morning and going to spray their plants with neem oil.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was very time-consuming, super labor-intensive,
Absolutely.
and there was no question that's how they were going to do it. They weren't going near pesticides.
Right, and to be honest, some of the reasons that they weren't going to pesticides were conscience, but also. When you start buying traditional products, you start to show up on the radar. So some of these traditional growers have been around for a long time because they have managed to remain invisible. But nevertheless, these days, everybody's very aware of what they're putting on the product because they know eventually it's going to end up in somebody's
So let's talk
life.
about how this beginning of reporting evolved into how you got involved in reading and writing and reporting and unearthing some interesting and I think really profound information about this vapor health emergency.
Well, my first interest was to write a book about the old hippies that had gone out there and what had happened since then. I figured the cannabis story is evolving so rapidly that it's like trying to catch lightning or whatever. I can't remember what the expression is, but I just didn't think that was going to work. And then I started noticing articles about contamination in marijuana and cannabis products. And the thing that really caught my eye was the sheriff of Mendocino County. His name is Thomas Ullman. Very well liked in that county. It's kind of unusual in my experience, and I've been a journalist for 50 years. For people who are outlaw growers or traditional growers to say we love our sheriff, and he gave an interview to somebody in which he said, "I don't care about a bunch of old hippies. I got my hands full with cartels and Native Americans killing each other, and people who are growing and destroying the environment. Releasing sewage into the creeks and that sort of thing, contaminating the soil." So I thought that, hey, that's pretty interesting. And then he posted a video on an obscure Facebook page in which he displayed a whole pile of illegal counterfeit vape cartridges that were packaged to look like the real thing. And he said, I had these cartridges, had the oil in these cartridges tested, and they came back with lethal levels of contaminants. And that really caught my attention. So I got in touch with him. I went out to California. I interviewed the sheriff at his office, and it was a great interview. He said, Foster, I don't smoke marijuana, and I believe him. He said, but all my friends do. And when I took these results to my friends, one of them just about puked on the spot because he said, I have been using that cartridge. I have been vaping from cartridges with that name on it, and so at that point, I thought, this is explosive. This is absolutely huge. This was a $5 million shipment that he intercepted. That means that there were probably multiples of that that didn't get intercepted. So the next stop I made was the California Board of Cannabis Control. I made an appointment with the director, whose name escapes me at the moment, and I was supposed to see her sometime after lunch the day that I went there. About 15 minutes before I was supposed to go there, I got a call from Alex Traverso, who is her chief spokesman, and he said the director had a last-minute legislative issue come up, and she won't be available. And I thought that sounded kind of suspicious. So I went there anyway, and this Alex Traverso comes to meet me in the lobby, and he hands me all these colored brochures and things like that, and he turns as if to walk away. And I said, well, wait a minute, can we talk? So we sat and talked, and I asked him, I said, I've run across this information. What do you do with it? And he said, well, that's not our department. I said, well, whose department is it? It's potentially a huge health issue, a health crisis. There are a lot of people out there who might be vaping this stuff, and nobody really knows what that means or what it could cause. And he said, well, in cannabis regulation in California, there are a number of different agencies, and we just kind of stick in our own lane. We stay in our own lane. And I thought that was really very strange. And I said, well, whose lane is this one in? And he said, oh, that's Department of Pesticide Regulation. So I got in the car and I drove to downtown Sacramento. I went to the pesticide regulation people. I got the spokesman. I got one of the scientists. I sat there and talked to them for about 30 minutes. And most of it was mumbo jumbo. But I asked this guy 6 times, this scientist, said, what do you do? Who do you call if you run across a batch of illegal cannabis oil or outlaw cannabis oil? Who do you call if you know that it's potentially contaminated with a very dangerous fungicide? And after asking him 6 times, he finally said, we only handle legal cannabis. We don't handle illegal cannabis. I don't know. So I said, I'm sitting here with this information and I'm thinking, I wonder what's going to happen. And guess what happened? At least in my opinion, guess what happened?
Did he have the batch analyzed? Do we know what was in it? Can you tell us what was in it? Okay.
He did. Yes. He had the batch tested, and it came back sort of a soup of various pesticides and other contaminants. But the thing that really stuck out, there's one particular fungicide which is very widely used around the world. It's for treating mold, and mold is a huge problem in the cannabis business and growing marijuana. You can spend your whole year growing your crop, and you get a rain at the wrong time, fungus gets a hold, and you've lost your whole crop. So some of these growers, outlaw growers, are using a product called myclobutanil, myclobutanil, myclobutanil. It's a fungicide. It's used on grapes. It's used on almonds, which means it's everywhere in California. It's not a problem when it's used on products like that because they get washed before they're consumed. Yeah. However, on cannabis, it is not washed. It is in the leaf, and it's all over the plant. Now you can smoke marijuana in the vegetable state, and it can have some myclobutanil in it, but it's not probably going to hurt you. It's definitely not. It's probably not going to hurt you. What happens though is when they concentrate the THC down into an oil, you're also concentrating the contaminants, and that's how you get 7,000 times the state limit of a fungicide, which I then looked up and discovered that at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, it begins to break down and releases hydrogen cyanide, which is the same thing the Nazis used to kill Jews.
Wait, one second.
minorities.
You said 7,000 times the concentration. Is that what the sheriff found? Did he have this stuff tested in a lab? I mean, what's the deal?
There's a lab in Ukiah, which is where the sheriff's office is, that is in the business of what they call remediating cannabis oil. And that means if you're a legitimate grower and you have processed your cannabis into an oil, it has to be tested before it can go to market. And if you know that you've got fungicides and other things in your cannabis oil, you can take it to this place and they will clean it.
Oh, wow.
It'll come in dirty and it'll go out clean. Right. I believe they're the only people who are doing it, at least in California. So they test a lot of cannabis. And the sheriff thought, what the hell? I'll have these guys test it. They agreed to do it for no fee. And his interest had nothing to do with contaminants, by the way. His sheriffs, he said, Foster, I don't smoke marijuana, but all my friends do. And his friends were saying, I don't believe there's 24% this and 36% that. And so we had it tested. The shock that he got and everybody else who saw these results was this myclobutanil. And he said he showed it to one friend, and he said the guy just about puked on the spot because he had been using those same cartridges.
Wow. So how widely do we think this myclobutanil is spread at this point? Does anybody know? Does anybody have any idea?
I would say that it probably could be determined based on sales of the product throughout California. But I spoke to the person who owns a farm supply store in Mendocino County. She does not sell myclobutanil, but she said, I see people using it on their crops. The people that she sees using it on their crops are not traditional growers. They're not people who have been out there forever. These are new people who are moving in, hoping to cash in on the cannabis rush, so on the green rush.
It's very disconcerting when you tell us that all the regulatory channels in California aren't. I mean, it makes sense they're not looking at the illegal market on some level, but I think some enormous amount of product is still being sold in the non-traditional, shall we say, markets, right? I mean, like 50% of what's grown in California.
Well, according to the now governor of California, before he was elected, about 85 to 90% of the cannabis that's produced in California is sold on the black market. So it's huge. It's believed that the legit market for cannabis is California. About 10% of the total.
In the
That's
country.
all.
Okay.
Everywhere.
But something then isn't making sense to me in your story. If this chemical is in such wide use, and if it's being then shipped throughout the country, why have I don't want to say only, but 12 people have died and I think 800 cases have been reported. That's not very much, considering how vast this problem could or might be, given what your reporting tells you.
Well, as near as I can tell, young people started using cannabis oil in e-cigarette devices this past spring. They discovered that you could take an e-cigarette device like a Juul, you could crack it open, you could put cannabis oil in there, and you could smoke it in school, and nobody would know the difference because vaporized cannabis oil is almost indetectable. You can almost sit next to somebody, and they wouldn't even, it doesn't have any smell. So they were able to get high in school, but they were also doing other things. They were torching cannabis oil using like a meth pipe, some sort of a device that's normally used for cooking methamphetamine and other products, and using a blowtorch, one of these small blowtorches, to heat it, and that heats it to such a temperature that anything that's contaminated any contaminant in the product is going into your lungs. And the director of this lab out there, whose name is David Kurzweil, was horrified when he told me, he said, imagine that these kids think that they're getting a better high, but what they're really getting are lungs full of contaminants. Now, maybe some of these contaminants are not a problem, but if you're inhaling, hydrogen cyanide, it's going to affect you very rapidly. And what was interesting to me when these cases came up is that the symptoms for cyanide poisoning, inhaled cyanide, are very similar to the symptoms that these people were presenting with. But going backwards, difficulty breathing, nausea, if you're feeling like you're having a heart attack, and it comes on very, very suddenly. But my hair was on fire. If I had any, my hair would have been on fire. I thought, this is like a national health crisis. Millions of people are using these cartridges, and they have no idea what's going into their lungs. I could not get anybody to pay attention. The only place that would publish my reporting is a little website called the Marijuana Times, marijuanatimes.org. It was the only place that I was in touch with all the big marijuana sites like Leafly, and I was in touch with the New York Times, where I know people, Washington Post. I went to everybody.
What was the response?
I couldn't get anybody to bite. There was either no response or they just weren't interested. And I think what happened was the subject was too complicated to easily understand. And an awful lot of news today is reported from cubicles. People don't even go out of the building. It's whatever they can find online and who they can get on the phone. And I also think because Marijuana Times as a website is not slick, and it's not well known. No one's ever heard of it. And I just don't think they took it seriously.
But I want to go back to my question of, if this is so widespread, and if that number, 90% of the cannabis grown in California, is being exported out of state, this seems like it would be a mega crisis, not a 12-person death crisis.
Well, I think that a lot of it has to do with how people are consuming the oils, the illegal oils, or the
You're
alcohol
talking about
oils.
the heat at which they're elevating it to. Because most vaporizers aren't going that much above 400 degrees, as far as I know. I mean, there's no control on the cheap pens. There's almost no control on temperature, right?
On some of the devices, there is a heat control mechanism, but for the most part, from what I've read, most of the vaping devices are set to just below 400 degrees. It's like 360, 390, that sort of thing. When you get above 400 degrees, and now it may be that the e-cigarettes, the nicotine devices, the ones that are designed for nicotine, may be set at a higher temperature. This I don't know. I think it has a combination of who's making the oil, what are they making it from. So in the last, I think in the last year, an interesting thing has developed. Yes, there's a lot of outlaw weed that's being exported across the country, but now they're also selling the shake, which is what is the term they use for everything that's left over, the stems, the leaves that they trim off the buds. Shake is now a separate economy.
Oh yeah, it has been for a long time. Yeah,
right. But it could be that because there are so many new people who have gone to California to try to get into the business, who don't have much of a history and don't really understand what they're doing, that they may be using products that are like myclobutanil that are dangerous, and maybe they don't even know it. So there's probably a lot of shake and a lot of oil that's going out across the country.
By the way,
this year,
I just Googled the temperature of an e-cigarette vaporizer, and if your theory is right, it ranges, according to whatever I'm looking at, vapey360.com. It ranges between 392 Fahrenheit to 480. So it's within the range it is within the range you're talking about here.
And I think it's possible that when all is said and done, it's going to be nicotine designated vape devices into which cannabis oil is being put and used and vaped, because that's the only thing I can understand that would explain it. The surge in youth vaping that people are talking about is a relatively recent phenomenon, and it's because these kids have discovered that they can put cannabis oil into a Juul or any of these other devices that are not designed for cannabis.
But I don't understand why they just wouldn't put it in. I mean, Juul is the same company that makes packs makes Juul, right? And it's the exact same. Is it not the same machine? I
assume so.
So why would you even need to tear the packs apart to put it into a Juul? Is it just that the packs cost $200 and they don't want to spend it? They can. Oh, that's probably why. I'm answering my own question. A Juul costs nothing, right? A packs cost a couple $100. Yeah.
You can take a. I mean, I don't know the difference. I don't know about that, but I just know that those devices, you can go to YouTube and you can find instructions on how to hack an e-cigarette pod and pour cannabis oil into it and then put it back together again and vape it.
You know, the crazy thing about this story is during alcohol prohibition, a lot of people died from shit alcohol that was being made from really bad substances, like turpentine, which they were selling as bourbon, and people would drink it because of prohibition, and boom, they were dead. It's a strange, eerie parallel. Did you know about that? Don't you think?
Well, it's kind of the alternate universe. During Prohibition, approximately as many as 50,000 people died from alcohol poisoning, and hundreds of thousands were poisoned, were made sick. That was an effort to prevent people from drinking alcohol. Now we're legalizing marijuana. We're legalizing cannabis. We're saying go ahead as it turns out, there's not enough regulation for the legalization. California legalized cannabis before it was ready to regulate it, and it's completely out of control.
California has more regulations on cannabis than any other. Talk about alternate universes. Their regs are deep and heavy, and it seems that they've blown it. What do you think?
Well, the head of the lab in Ukiah, who did this test that discovered the cyanide-producing fungicide, I said, I went to Sacramento. Nobody wants to take responsibility for this. I feel like this is a huge, possibly a national health crisis. What's going on? You deal with these regulators. And she said, very simply, it's a shit show at every level. Regulation is a shit show at every level in California. And the guy who owns that particular company that cleans cannabis said, we don't. I said, what about the people who are on the ground, the inspectors, the state inspectors? He said, well, they don't last very long. They either quit or get fired. I said, why? He said, I don't know, but there is nobody around to report something to, let alone investigate it.
Wow, they're so understaffed, probably. It seems to me that, honestly, again and again and again and again, the only way to really grapple with this reasonably, rationally, intelligently is to go for national legalization.
The problem is national, the lack of national oversight, basically. Cannabis is regulated by each state. So you've got 50 different states, 50 different regulatory schemes, 50 different sets of political climates. And within those 50 states, you've got counties and you've got towns, all of which have the right to say, we don't want a dispensary or we don't want any cannabis growing in our jurisdiction. Now you've got 50 fiefdoms, sort of, and you cannot carry any cannabis product across state lines at the moment. So the head of branding at Acreage Holdings, a guy named Harris Damashek, who recently moved on to another jobs, told me, imagine the metaphor he used. Imagine if, in order to sell a bottle of Coca-Cola, Coke had to grow the cane in each state. They couldn't sell that cane. They couldn't use that cane in any other state, and they had to package it, and they had to advertise it, and they had to distribute it and market it according to regulations in that state. Each state has its own set of regulations for all of that. And he said it's at least as complicated as the pharmaceutical industry.
It's more complicated in a way because you also have to process that cane in each state.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a terrible lack of it's an abdication of responsibility, really, especially when you've got people who may not even, as you said, may not even know they're using harmful pesticides.
Exactly.
They don't know what they're doing half the time, I'm sure.
Well,
not our friends in the Emerald Triangle. They definitely
right.
know what they're doing, but I'm sure there's a lot of operations going on where people are just not that clued in. What were you going to say?
Well, here's what's going to happen. In August, the head of legal policy, basically at the FDA, a guy named Lowell Schiller, addressed a meeting of the National Hemp Industry Association. I think that's the name of the organization. In any event, it was in Portland. And he was there to talk about what the FDA is thinking about CBD products, with the CBD being the non-psychoactive element that's in the candies and everything else. And some of the beverage companies are buying into that business. Everybody wants to be in that business. And this fellow Schiller told this group that the FDA considers CBD basically a drug. They are not going to treat it as a non-regulated additive. They consider it a drug, and in saying so, this guy said very specifically. He said, under current law, it's unlawful to sell a food or dietary supplement with CBD in interstate commerce. And then he paused and he said, I'll repeat that. Under current law, it's unlawful to sell a food or dietary supplement with CBD in interstate commerce. That, to me, is the opening bell of an FDA effort to take over the regulation of cannabis in this country. And the next step, obviously, is for the pharmaceutical industry to take over the cannabis industry. It's inevitable in my view, and it's not necessarily.
I think it's one possibility, and I think it's going to happen in some way. But I don't think the pharmaceutical industry is going to really take over the entire cannabis industry. But that's not sort of the point, though. I mean, I think the point is that there is still no overriding body looking at this stuff. Yeah,
right. Nobody's in charge. That's kind of where I came down. Joe, as I was talking to somebody about this, and I said, the problem is there's nobody in charge. There's nobody in charge of this issue nationally. And when I talk about the drug industry getting involved, Teva Pharmaceuticals, biggest drug company in the world, has just announced that it's partnering with an Israeli chain of pharmacies to import cannabis products into Israel probably from Canada, where it's legal. I look at this as wasn't a hippie, but a cannabis user, a marijuana smoker. What's the big deal? And after all this research I've done, and this is just one possible contaminant, I ask myself, who's going to be able to fix this problem? Who's got the labs? Who's got the scientists? Who can tell consumers what's in what they just purchased? And I don't see anybody else other than the drug industry. I don't see how this is going to happen without the drug industry being centrally involved in guaranteeing product quality.
I certainly hope you're wrong.
I do too.
I sort of think the pharmaceutical industry's got enough of a stake in all of our lives.
Yep.
There's one sentence you wrote that I want to take issue with. By the way, your reporting has been great and your stories are fantastic, and I encourage everyone to read them on is it the marijuanatimes.org?
marijuanatimes.org, and I also have other content at Medium. I have a publication called Marijuana Wire.
Okay, great. We'll supply those links in the blog that accompanies this episode. But you did write this sentence, which is, it seems an appropriate moment to call out an inconvenient truth about marijuana legalization, that America's noble pot experiment is failing miserably. I just don't agree with you.
Well, I look at it from a lot of different perspectives. I was a columnist at the Wall Street Journal, and I'm looking at it as one of the ways I look at it is as an investment story, and the investment story is a disaster. Billions of dollars of eager money flowed into all these cannabis companies in Canada, hoping to get a jump when the federal government in the United States made cannabis legal. Okay, those stocks peaked in January of 2018 when legal, I think it was recreational became legal in California. Those stocks are all down by half and some by almost 2/3. That the air is going out of the bubble. The green rush is hitting a wall. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is public health and safety. There is no guarantee that anything that you use that's cannabis related is what it says on the package. And that includes what you buy in a dispensary, because guess what? Human beings run dispensaries. And if they have maybe a bad season, they might be buying black market product and not realizing that it's contaminated.
I just don't find this tracking to reality.
Mm-hmm.
30 million people use cannabis in the United States, maybe daily, I don't know, weekly on some semi-regular basis.
Right.
They're not all falling deathly sick.
Right.
Many companies are on track to be making money. We can all smoke, if we want to smoke, flower, or we can use edibles. There's many options of product. And you sound to me very prohibitionist when we take a problem that has occurred in an emerging market, like death. That's a big problem, I would say. and sort of extrapolate it to shut everything down or pronounce it a failure. I think you're coming at it. You're too harsh and you're too quick in your assessment.
Well, I've been immersed in it for a long time. I'm not a prohibitionist. I'm in favor of product safety. I'm in favor of intelligent, thoughtful regulation, and I think that the federal government has completely failed to step up to the plate, and nothing is going to happen before the 2020 presidential election. And whether it happens afterward, I don't know. Congress is currently possibly on the verge of pass. If they didn't pass it yesterday, they might have passed it today. A bill that would allow people in the cannabis industry to put their money in banks, which they can't right now. It's against the law. Or the banks won't take the money because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble with the Federal Reserve because cannabis is still a Schedule I drug. So you've just got this system that's completely this huge ball of string. And when I say that the cannabis, that the marijuana legalization is failing, I'm not suggesting that it's failed, and I'm not suggesting that marijuana should be prohibited. I'm suggesting that our public leaders, our leaders have failed to recognize that this is a huge, enormous potential industry that is so badly regulated that people are dying.
On this, we will agree. Foster, I want to thank you for this interview. It's been really insightful, and I want to help you somehow encourage you to keep reporting what you're doing and doing what you're doing. And maybe one day one of those larger media outlets will pick up a strand and follow you.
Well, I hope so. I did have a piece in USA Today last week. That was a breakthrough.
That's great. We'll be sharing it on the blog. And again, I want to thank you for your time and your reporting. Really, it is what journalists do.
Yes,
and
you're welcome.
And we need to support that in every way possible. Thanks again.
The Brave New Weed podcast is an advocate and supporter of the Medical Cannabis Mentor platform. Medical Cannabis Mentor is an evidence-based educational platform for doctors, dispensaries, and patients that uses state-of-the-art online learning technology to educate you in today's modern cannabis world. You can find out more information by visiting medicalcannabismentor.com.
Shortly after I spoke with Foster, actually the day after, a report came out from the Mayo Clinic, and it said that the injuries to people's lungs looked like chemical burns. And Foster asked him if it could be caused by myclobutanil, and he said that was a very plausible explanation that he'd heard about, but needs to be looked at more closely.
Yeah, the Dr. Brandon Larsen of the Mayo Clinic did state that it was similar to what injuries people would see in like World War I and World War II, people who were exposed to mustard gas and hydrogen cyanide gases. So that makes a lot of sense.
Really interesting, and I hope we get more reporting about it.
Well, there is some interesting news associated with this. Obviously, we will continue to keep up on this story as best we can. But I have been reading in response to this that a lot of vape manufacturers, people who are legitimate, above the board, licensed producers of THC materials, are actually now turning to anti-counterfeiting packaging and products that have been used in other things, from cigarettes to alcohol to, you know, high-end technology products. These same sort of things are now being applied or explored, at least, for potential uses in the cannabis space. Things like security labels and barcodes and microchips and, even serialized numbers and counting so that things can be better tracked. So, guys, if you're out there, be safe.
I just want to add that all of this is interesting, and all of it could be taken care of more easily with national regulation of products. That's one thing that is absolutely clear in all of this. So folks, talk to your legislators and maybe talk to them about what they're doing to sort of move this forward, because these are the kind of crises that need not happen.
Yeah, I mean, if only there was some sort of big, national decision that we could make a choice about who to put in power coming up just around the corner, that we might be able to do something about this.
In closing, I want to thank our sponsor, Firefly 2 Plus. They have really enabled this episode to happen and to be brought to you quickly. We want to encourage you to check out the Firefly 2 Plus. And if you are interested in it, you can go to their website, thefirefly.com, use the promo code BRAVE, BRAVE, and that will bring you a 20% discount on this new, really wonderful product. So please, folks, check it out. Take advantage of this offer. It's not going to be around forever. We really believe that it's an excellent product. Matthew, thank you so much for joining.
Joe, thanks so much. Again, I do think that this episode is just packed full of great information, and it's a pleasure for me every time to get to share the air with you.
So, listeners, if you think it's full of packed information, please share it widely. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @bravenewweed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.